The NFL didn't just decide who could play, it decided who could be trusted. Black players were welcomed when the job required speed, violence, and sacrifice, but when it came to positions built on calm, precision, and decision making, the door stayed closed. Kicker was one of those positions until Gene Mingo. Before the league ever trusted a black man to decide games with his foot, Mingo had already survived loss, poverty, and a childhood promise never to quit again. He didn't come from the college football royalty, he came from a Navy base, a factory floor, and a handwritten letter that changed his life. Gene Mingo didn't just become the first black place kicker, he helped save an entire league. And when the NFL was done with him, it made sure his name disappeared. Gene Mingo's football life didn't begin with the dreams of the NFL. It began with a moment of shame, loss, and a promise he would spend the rest of his life trying not to break. As a kid in Akron, Ohio, Gene followed his cousin Dean Newby everywhere. Dean was everything Gene wanted to be: tougher, faster, more confident. When Dean convinced him to play junior football, Gene was just proud to wear the uniform. But that pride disappeared the first time he tasted his own blood during a scrimmage. One hard hit was enough. Gene quit that day. Dean didn't let him forget it. He called Gene a quitter and tried to drag him back to the field. Then, less than 2 weeks later, Dean was mauled by a neighbor's dog and died on an emergency room table. At the funeral, Gene walked into the house with his mother to say goodbye. His aunt stood there crying, asking who would be her baby now. When Gene offered himself, she looked down at him and said the words that would follow him forever: "You can't be my baby. You're a quitter." Standing there, looking at his cousin's casket, Gene made a promise. He told her and himself that he would never quit again. From that moment forward, football stopped being a game. It became proof that he could take pain, proof that he could finish what he started, proof that he wasn't the boy who walked away. Life didn't make that promise easy to keep. Gene grew up in a neighborhood where his family's presence wasn't welcome. He skipped school often, not because he didn't care, but because survival came first. When his mother suffered repeated heart attacks and strokes, Gene left school entirely to care for her. For 3 years, he stayed home while others moved forward. When she died at just 50 years old, Gene went back to school older, bigger, and already carrying adult weight on his shoulders. Football was the only place that made sense anymore, and soon, it would become the only place where Gene Mingo believed he belonged. By the time Gene Mingo returned to school, he was already living in a body that didn't match his age. He was older than his classmates, bigger than most of them, and carrying responsibilities they didn't understand. On the football field, that difference showed immediately. He dominated. But in the classroom, it was the opposite. Teachers saw an athlete first and a student second. And Gene felt it every time eyes turned toward him when he raised his hand. One moment in particular broke something inside him. A teacher singled him out sarcastically in front of the class, reducing him to the big football player who needed help. Embarrassed and angry, Gene stood up and walked out, deciding education wasn't meant for him. Instead, he joined the Navy, hoping to see the world and find direction. What he found was football again. Navy bases had teams, and Gene became a star almost immediately, running the ball, playing defense, returning kicks, and even kicking field goals. On base, he was known, respected, trusted. For the first time, his versatility wasn't a problem, it was his value. After 3 years, Gene came home to Akron and took a job at the Goodyear plant, convinced his football days were over. No college career, no connections, no roadmap to the pros. Then, one day in 1960, he was reading the newspaper and saw something that changed everything. The American Football League was forming, and a former Army player had just signed with the Denver Broncos. If an Army player could get a shot, Gene believed he could too. So he did something unheard of. He wrote the Broncos general manager a letter. It took time, he used a dictionary, his sister helped him with spelling, but the letter was honest. He explained who he was, where he'd played, and why he deserved a chance. Weeks later, a response arrived: a contract for $6,500. No tryout camp tour, no college highlight reel, just an invitation to compete. Gene didn't realize it yet, but by signing that contract, he wasn't just chasing a job, he was stepping into a league that would test how far his promise to never quit could really go. By the time training camp opened in the summer of 1960, Gene Mingo already knew the odds. He was one of nearly 100 players fighting for roster spots on a brand new Denver Broncos team. No college pedigree, no safety net, and no patience from coaches trying to build credibility in a league fighting for survival. In fact, behind the scenes, Mingo was already marked for release, he just didn't know it yet. Then, in one practice, everything shifted. Broncos head coach Frank Philchalk was furious. The team's kicking situation was a disaster. Practice stopped, whistles blew, tempers flared. And that's when a teammate spoke up. Mingo can kick. Philchalk waved him down almost dismissively. If he could kick, prove it. Mingo's first attempt sailed through the uprights, clean, high, perfect. The ball was moved back, another kick, good again. Then another from a different angle, this one sliced wide right. Philchalk barked at him to get out of there. Most players would have walked off. Gene turned away, then stopped. Something told him not to quit. He went back and asked for one more chance. From that moment on, every kick split the uprights. That decision changed NFL history. Gene Mingo became the first black place kicker in professional football. Not because the league was ready, but because they had no choice. They needed points, they needed wins, and they needed him. Just weeks later, on September 9th, 1960, the AFL kicked off its first regular season game ever, Denver Broncos versus Boston Patriots. Midway through the game, Denver's return man went down injured. Phil Chalk turned to Mingo again. Punt return, no hesitation. Mingo fielded the ball and ran for 76 yards for a touchdown, scoring the first punt return touchdown in AFL history, a play that helped Denver win 13-10, securing the first victory the league ever recorded. And then came the twist. After winning the game with his legs, Gene was supposed to finish it with his foot. He lined up for the extra point and missed, exhausted, drained, furious with himself. What no one realized yet was this: Gene Mingo wasn't just making history, he was quietly becoming the most important player in a league desperate to survive. By the end of the 1960 season, Gene Mingo wasn't just a novelty, he was production. He finished his rookie year as the AFL's leading scorer with 123 points, a staggering total for a league trying to prove it belonged on the same field as the NFL. He wasn't just kicking extra points, he was running the ball and doing whatever Denver needed to stay competitive. In the process, he also scored the first points ever at Mile High Stadium, then called Bear Stadium, with an 18-yard field goal, quietly planting his name into multiple firsts that history would later gloss over. The following season only reinforced his value. In the 1961 season opener against the Buffalo Bills, Mingo lined up at halfback and threw a 50-yard touchdown pass to Lionel Taylor, then kicked the extra points himself in a 22-10 win. He wasn't just versatile, he was indispensable. By 1962, he did it again, leading the AFL in scoring with 137 points, proving his rookie season wasn't a fluke. That same year, he ripped off an 82-yard touchdown against the Raiders, still the longest run in Denver Broncos franchise history. By every measurable standard, Gene Mingo was elite. Scoring titles, franchise records, game-changing plays. And yet, when the AFL announced his all-star selections, his name was missing. Again, no honor, no recognition, no acknowledgement of what he had meant to the league's survival. Mingo didn't sugarcoat it later. When asked why, he gave the answer many players were afraid to say out loud. It had to be. He didn't need to explain what it meant. Everyone understood. That offseason, future Hall of Famer Willie Davis pulled him aside and gave him advice that sounded less like encouragement and more like a warning. Keep your nose clean. Do exactly what they say, because the margin for error wasn't the same. The league would tolerate his production, but it was still waiting for a reason to move on. And that reason was already being prepared. When Mingo returned to camp, the Broncos had invited 7 different kickers to compete for his job. It wasn't subtle, it was a message. Gene responded the only way he knew how, by believing none of them could outkick him. But belief wouldn't be enough forever. By the mid-1960s, Gene Mingo understood something most fans never see. Production didn't equal protection. Even after leading the AFL in scoring twice, even after saving games and legitimizing a young league, his grip on a roster spot was fragile. When Denver brought multiple kickers into camp, the message was clear. They were looking for someone else. Mingo responded with confidence, even teaching competitors how to kick. He believed ability would win out. What he didn't fully grasp was how little room he had left to be human. That reality hit in 1964 on a road trip to Oakland. Curfew rules were broken, not in some outrageous way, but in the same casual, careless way players across the league had broken them for years. The difference was visibility. The difference was race. When the situation involved white teammates, discipline had been quiet or non-existent. When it involved Gene, the response was immediate and final. He was pulled from the team before the game even started and sent home. There was no long meeting, no second chance, no weighing of everything he had done for the franchise. One incident erased years of production. In an era obsessed with image, Gene Mingo became inconvenient. From there, his career drifted. He played for other teams, Oakland, Miami, Washington, but the security was gone. And then came the hit that should have stopped everything. In 1968, playing for Washington, Mingo sprinted downfield on a kickoff and collided head on with returner Timmy Brown. At that same moment, another defender struck Brown from behind. Gene felt what he later described as an axe hitting the center of his head. He went down, then got back up. He finished the game, he kicked, he even hit the tying field goal in a 35-35 tie. The problem was, Gene didn't remember any of it. Days later, he woke up in a hospital. Doctors had never told him how serious the injury was. Coaches never warned him that continuing to play could cost. And despite medical staff later admitting he had played on pure instinct, Washington released him anyway, claiming he had kicked erratically. Gene Mingo had done everything the league asked of him, and the league let him walk away broken. When football finally let go of Gene Mingo, it didn't release him gently, it dropped him. Years of collisions, untreated head trauma, and a body pushed past warning signs followed him home. And the league that profited from his versatility offered no roadmap for what came next. The pain was constant, his back failed him, his neck followed. Surgeries piled up. And like so many players from that era, Gene looked for relief anywhere he could find it. That's how cocaine entered the picture, not as a party drug, as pain management, as escape, as a way to quiet a body and mind that never fully came down from game speed. What started as coping turned into paranoia, and in 1986, that spiral nearly ended everything. One night, high and frightened, Gene believed he needed to protect his home. He bought a gun. Later, in a moment he would spend the rest of his life owning, the weapon discharged. His wife was struck. She survived, barely. Gene was arrested, humiliated, and forced to confront the fact that football hadn't just left him injured, it had left him unprepared to live. The most powerful part of this story isn't that he fell, it's that he stopped falling. Gene never touched cocaine again. He accepted probation, responsibility, and the long work of repair. Not just to his marriage, but to himself. Required to find employment, he was steered toward addiction treatment. When asked if he wanted to become a counselor, Gene laughed. He didn't even have a GED. But for the first time in his life, embarrassment didn't stop him. Purpose pushed him forward. He went back to school, finished, excelled, became a certified drug and alcohol counselor. For over a decade, he helped people society had written off, the same way football once tried to write him off. Some knew him as a former player. Many knew him only as the man who helped save their lives. The league never gave Gene Mingo a safety net. He built one anyway. Gene Mingo didn't just break a color barrier, he broke a psychological one. He proved a black man could be trusted with the most conservative, pressure filled moments in football long before the league was ready to admit it. He helped save the AFL, set records, and paid for it with his body, his health, and years of silence. History didn't celebrate him, it moved past him. And that's exactly why stories like this matter. If this is the first time you've heard the name Gene Mingo, that's not an accident. So do me a favor, like this video, leave a comment, and tell us if Gene Mingo belongs in the Hall of Fame. And if you care about uncovering the stories football forgot, subscribe to the channel, because every day we rediscover the black NFL legends history tried to erase.